Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the next episode of Coalitions Revisited. This time it's Eurocorps. We have only Soviets left, technically, even though they're not even a coalition, but yeah. But I will also do, as I said last time, Blue 4 and Red 4, as in the decks without prototypes, effectively mixed decks. Relatively briefly, as brief as it's possible. I will obviously not go into every single unit, but more about the units that these decks have available that are noteworthy. Another thing is, I know I've posted basically only 1 versus balanced recently, and I know you're already sick of it, but the thing is, I just haven't played Wargame, or virtually no Wargame, ever since those games, so that's all I had to upload. And I have a few games left, but maybe I'll end up playing some actual Wargame, so you have a little bit of a break of these videos. But I think that's all there is to it. So yeah, let's get into Eurocorps. Oh, another thing, I think it wasn't on the last video, but on a different Coalitions Revisited video. Someone mentioned that for one, I talk too fast, and I think especially in non-gameplay videos, I usually like these type of videos specifically, I tend to talk too fast, and I tend to not notice that until afterwards, and then I'm too lazy to record the whole video. That's one thing, and I hope I'll be able to adjust that. The other thing is that I also tend to not really explain why certain units are good and bad. And for one, that is intentional because these videos are not meant to be for completely new players. On the other hand, I think sometimes it's just not obvious. So I think, at least if I remember, I'll try to explain why a certain unit are good or bad when it's not necessarily obvious. Like if it's obvious for someone who has, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, 500 hours of Wargame, then I'll not really mention it. But if it's something that you don't really get unless you know the hidden stats or specific mechanics, then I'll try to mention it. And that's, I think, actually all for the whole pre-talk. So yeah, Eurocorps. Usually considered the strongest non-DLC deck. Some consider it the strongest deck overall. One thing is for certain, it is very strong. So yeah, logistics hub, I think nothing too noteworthy. Leopard 2 is one of the few Blue 4 tanks that has 3 top armor. I think you have the Leopard 2, the M1. Oops. You have the Leopard 2, the M1, and the Chieftain. I think those are all. You get like a Leopard 1 version, so you get some IVs, some other tanks, but they have only one, or in the case of the Leopard, only 2 top armor. I think Netherlands also only gets the Leopard 1. Oh yeah, you get the Merkava as well, obviously the OP Tsarit. But it's just a sturdy tank CV. You don't really care about the gun. It's mostly body armor, most notably top and then back armor, to protect against artillery. Back armor because bombs and HE artillery can obviously won't only hit you on the top, so they can obviously also hit you on back and side. So that's why that armor is somewhat important as well. Top obviously against that as well, but top also because cluster artillery will only hit top armor. And artillery or indirect fire, most notably artillery and obviously bombers, are the biggest enemies of command vehicles or command units, of course. I guess, obviously, if you want to take a command infantry, obviously take the French one in the Panther, because it has rocket pods, and it's of course and it is fast as well. Yeah, just the usual supply stuff. I think it should be obvious, but usually supply helos are not worth it. Most notably, not when they're cheap, because they're very, very inefficient. Like for 25 points, you get, you pay more points on the helicopter for less supply than you get. For 25 points, you get less supply than you get for 20 points. That's what I'm saying here. And the thing is with helicopters, very often they're not even faster than trucks, because you can't really get them directly to the front line. You have to get them a bit behind, because obviously it's a lot easier to shoot at helicopters from afar than it is to shoot at vehicles, because vehicles can use cover. So yeah, if you use helicopters, either only supply expensive ones because they're at least somewhat cost efficient or point efficient, or both, like both points, on big maps only. Yeah. Infantry, Milan 1s, don't underestimate Milan 1s. Milan 1 spam can be incredibly annoying for the enemy because it's cheap. 17 AP is enough to be a threat, especially versus side shots, and to one-shot most IFVs and light vehicles. And you get plenty of them, and they're cheap as fuck. In an unspec deck, I'd still go for Milan 3, but in a mech deck, maybe even a motorized deck, I think a card of Milan F1 can definitely be quite useful. Obviously in motorized you don't get the 5-point transport, so then the point is, it's not as big of a deal anymore, but I think in the mech deck for 15 points a squad, definitely worth using. Chasseur, you never buy Chasseur for themselves. Chasseur 85 are alright, but base Chasseur are bad because they have an SMG, and SMG are incredibly bad on most units. Well, on shock infantry, training shock infantry, they are alright. On elite forces, they're actually good, but on regular infantry and reservists, SMG is the worst primary weapon type you can have. And if that wasn't bad enough, they also have the worst anti-tank weapon in the game. The only one with so little range, horrible accuracy, only 10 RPM for, these sets. If you compare to the M72 Law, which is also very bad, at the very least that thing has 20 RPM, and 13 versus 14 AP isn't as big of a deal. The Law is less accurate, but it's not 10% because you gain a bit of accuracy because of the extra range, of course. Still, they're just horrible. So you only buy them either if you want to spam, them as cheap meat shields in a 5-pointer, or if you want to get a cheap AMAX 10P, which is a pretty decent IFV. And there's Chasseur 85. They're not really great to spam as your main line infantry, because against infantry they're pretty cost inefficient, but they bring a decent anti-tank weapon to their stat. They're nice to have as like a one card off if you just want affordable and decent anti-tank weapons. Also, you can get them in the AMX NP, which is nice, or even in the WAP T20, which I wouldn't use in an unspec deck, but in a motorized deck, worth doing. Commando Marines, not great. 15-man elite squads, in theory, are actually, I would say, most of the time, more useful than 10-man. But when it comes to elite squads, their loadout is even more important, I'd say, than it is on line infantry or shock infantry, because elite squads already have the huge drawback that, unlike, let's say, expensive tanks or expensive planes, they die just as fast. They don't get any extra defensive mechanisms. They obviously don't get, they recover from morale faster, but that's more like indirect defenses, if that makes any sense. Like, if we look at tanks, more expensive tanks generally have more armor, meaning that they're harder to kill. More expensive planes have higher ECM and are thus harder to kill. More expensive infantry, and that's very often the same also goes for helicopters, but when it comes to infantry, Commando Marines die to 3 or 4 tank shots just like chasseurs, right? So that's why special forces are usually not, you should usually not use more than one card outside of maybe a motorized or mechanized deck. And even if you use one card, then it should be one that is really, really top tier. Yeah, and Commando Marines, they just aren't top tier. They have very basic weapons. They have a carbine, which is good, but they have a very, very basic, for special forces, they have a pretty basic anti-tank weapon and a completely basic machine guns. So there's really no reason to use them. They're just as basic as it's gonna be. And yeah. Legion are just not worth taking. They're also very basic for shock. Instead, Legion 90 are probably the best infantry squad that you can get in Eurocorps, I'd say. One thing, I've mentioned this before, I have to mention, but people often say that Highlanders 90, having the same loadout as Legion 90, but for the same price are just regular instead of shock. People often say, oh, they're 5 points too expensive, but honestly, I'd say the Legion 90 are 5 points too expensive, too cheap. I think Legion 90 would probably be better at 30 points, and Highlanders 90 are fine as they are. But that's a different topic altogether. Definitely take Highlanders Legion 90 in every deck you can. You only get one card. I suggest the VAB T20. The other options are just not particularly great. I mean, the Puma Pirate honestly isn't horrible in and of itself, but more when you have it on like a niche card. Like if you play Eurocorps Mechanized, getting one of your Recon infantry in that, might be nice to have. But when it comes to your main infantry kind of, or like your very important infantry, stick to the VAB. I personally prefer the VAB T20. But Mistral, one of the better manpads you can get. Probably arguably the best, but it's obviously also significantly more expensive because there are 5 men that are top tier manpad. I also just skipped a lot of infantry squads. Deckungsgruppe are not worth taking. Die quickly and don't have a huge amount of DPS. 5-man squads that are used offensively are often not very good. Again, in a deck like Mechanized, might be nice to get cheap, high veterancy martyrs. Base Fallschirmjäger, they're kind of similar like Commando Marines. They have an SMG, so they're murdering infantry, especially in cities. But it's still too niche of a role, and for 5 points more, you might as well get Fallschirmjäger 90, who not only perform just as well in like cities, if not better, outside of CQC, where SMGs get a 100% accuracy bonus. Obviously, they get a very, very strong anti-tank weapon. So if you're paying 30 points, or like at least 40 points, you might as well spend 5 points more to get a much, much better squad that is also, most importantly, better against vehicles. So this is one of those elite squads that has such a good loadout that they are worth taking. Still hard to fit in Eurocorps with all the various infantry squads that you need. Most notably, it's really because you don't have a all-around cheap infantry squad like Riflemen in the 5-pointers, like Grenadiers in 5-pointers, because they just don't cut it. Which is why, in my opinion, it's often hard to fit Fallschirmjäger 90 into an unspec deck. But again, that's a different story. But they have the best primary weapon in the game. They have one of the best anti-tank weapons in the game. They have the second best MG in the game. So they are just Terminators. Most of the time, ideally, you'd get 15 men and a somewhat worse primary weapon, like Corps Marinier 95. But that's a different story because the 5 extra HP are the only direct defensive mechanism, I guess, if you want to call it that infantry has, and yeah. But they're worth taking, and if you take them either in the Fuchs or the Fuchs Milan is probably the better idea for one. They're already expensive, so again, another 5 points is not going to be a huge deal. And with the veterancy that you have on the Fallschirmjäger 90, the Milan will actually be quite accurate. Fliegerfaust are just bad, low accuracy, low HE. Fliegerfaust 2, they are the other manpad option compared to the Mistral, cheaper, but also less range. They're both fine, but again, in an unspec deck, they're often hard to fit in. Heimatschützen are your German reservists. I wouldn't use them because you have a better option with the reserves, reservists. I don't know how to pronounce them, because they get a 5-point transport with 3 front armor and a better MG. And when it comes to reservists, the sole role is tanking. They're not meant to kill anything. If anything, only their transports are meant to kill infantry. And that's the AMX 13 does it better, but the AMX 13 also has 3 front armor and 2 side armor, which also makes it a lot more survivable, thus better at tanking. And when it comes to the infantry, they die just as fast, they move just as fast, their loadout doesn't matter. Unless, of course, Heimatschützen had something like a Panzerfaust 3 or something, then that would be a difference, but they're both trash, they're both never gonna hit, so it doesn't matter. So yeah, if you want reservists, use the French ones. How the Mighty Have Fallen. I don't know how many of you or when you guys started playing, but these used to be 10 points, and these used to be OP, I guess, yeah. I think if they were 10 points today, they would still probably be OP, but I think with the way the meta works, with the way DLC is, with the the way games are played and such, they probably wouldn't be as OP as they were before, because people, I think, are better at countering this type of stuff, but they would still be ridiculous, I'd imagine. The thing is, at 10 points they're too strong. At 50 points they're too weak. So they're awkward. Too weak is maybe an exaggeration, but they're just not really worth taking at 15 points, because you line infantry. The problem with them is they have just basic transports, which in and of itself isn't necessarily a problem. But if your infantry itself isn't very cost efficient, or like, let's say, below average meaning they're worth taking or useful, I'd say. If the infantry itself is a bit below average, then not rarely the transports can make up for it. See Chasseur. Chasseur have a good 5-pointer and a good IFV. But the transports are also just basic. The Milan isn't really bad, but the Fuchs Milan is a unit that you take on specific squads, such as Falchi Meccanici, such as the Milan 2 anti-tank squad. Not on Jäger, because they're meant to be spammed, because they're cheap line infantry, or cheap-ish since they're 15 and not 10 points. If they had a 5-pointer, that if that M113 had 2 front and 2 side armor, I think Jäger would be a good and by no means OP card. But as it stands now, they're just not really worth taking. If you want that, I think you're better off taking base Panzergrants in a 5-pointer, because they're pretty strong against infantry and still kind of cheap. And yeah, the anti-infantry infantry, if that makes, if you get what I mean with that, is just so awkward for Eurocorps, because Chasseur spam works decently, but the other issue is your fire support isn't very good. You have decent fire support at like medium-ish ranges with like AMX 13s, but your fire support is bad. Force fighting is usually the nightmare for Eurocorps. You can counteract that a bit with the LRM, but the LRM is not really it's more of a band-aid rather than a solution. It can and will help you in specific engagements, but the downtime of it and the travel time of it, meaning your opponent can anticipate, can counteract it, etc., make it so that it isn't very consistent in that regard. So that is the weakness of Eurocorps, and Jäger being so awkward is one of the reasons for that, because Jäger used to be the main infantry. So were Panzergrants, because they also used to be 15 points, and at 15 points Panzergrants would be absolutely ridiculous, even more so than Jäger at 10 points. But let's go back to the infantry. Milan 1 again goes the same point as for the French Milan 1. Milan 2, again. Panzergrants, base Panzergrants don't really have a role outside of Eurocorps mechanized, where you can get them on elite, and I have to say I kind of underestimated it, but Eurocorps mech with elite Panzergrants can be a bit of a pain. But outside of that, I would never really use base Panzergrants. They may be worth using in the 5-pointer, but I have very mixed results with that. In an unspec deck, that is. In mechanized, again, taking them on elite in the 5-pointer or in the Marder 1. But most notably the 5-pointer, I'd say, can be very strong. Panzergrants 90 are just very solid all around. Nearly all of the transports are worth taking. Most notably, you'd see them in the Marder 2, just to get the Marder 2 in your infantry type. If you want more affordable, heavy anti-tank weapons, you take your Legion 90 out in the VAP T20. But you can also use them in the 5-pointer if you want them cheap, or in the Marder 1 if you want to have something in between the Marder 2 and the 5-pointer. The other Marder 1s, you can take the Marder 1A1 or the Marder 1A2 rather, if you want a more accurate autocannon. That's the Milan 1, but most notably the more accurate autocannon, which at that high rate of fire is quite a big deal. You're also a bit faster, but that's whatever. But obviously it's more expensive, and I believe you get an availability penalty. But Marder 1A1 and 1A3, or honestly, I'd say 1A1 to 1A3, I would, in my opinion, are only really useful in mechanized, where you get the veterancy and you have the option to take lots of different infantry cards, so you're not screwed by only having your infantry in Mata 1s, A2s now or something. But yeah, Panzergranates 90 are just perfectly very strong infantry all around. Not to be used though as like your main infantry, because you only get one card of them, and they are a bit expensive to be used for that. And since Eurocorps can't really help too much with like fire support vehicles, you have to be very careful with your infantry usage and don't use them up too quickly. Rima, base Rima, again, like base Legion, they're just not very noteworthy. Rima 85, kind of the same role as Legion 90. They are better in forests most of the time because of the 20 RPM. But unless you want to put in both, I'd always take Legion 90 over Rima 85, because for one, they pack a bigger punch. They have more range, they are more accurate. They're just a lot more universal, and especially defensively in towns, they're so much stronger. And also at maximum range, that Applas can be a bit inconsistent. But some people like to take Legion 90 and Rima 85 in the Panther, for example, because Legion 90 don't come in the Panther. So there's that. Certainly very strong infantry as well. But I think, again, like Panzergranates, I'd say, for example, the base Panzergranates, just hard to fit in a Eurocorps unspec deck. Sappers, like most flamers, again, it's not that they're bad, they're just niche. In a mech or motor deck, give them a try, sure. Unspec deck, again, not worth taking, because for one, they're niche, so it's easy to lose them to just 5-pointers or something, and two, they're also not very card efficient most of the time. And yeah. But it's not like that flamers are bad by definition. It's just that these niche units are usually not worth taking in an unspec deck. I mean, unless, of course, if you play an unspec deck and it's specifically for town fights or something on a specific map, because you have specific maps for, specific maps, or with your teammates you have specific strategies, then you may want to take them, of course. But I'm usually not talking about these specific scenarios. Probably should have said that at the beginning. We're 22 minutes in, and we only got done with the first 2 tabs. But I think that the following tabs should be more easily or more quickly done. AML 60, don't underestimate this little thing. Very low aim time, very high rate of fire. Not really direct fire support, but it is pseudo direct fire support. They can't do a lot of work, but they're also a bit inconsistent, and I think they're only gonna be as strong if your opponent isn't really used to having to play against them. But they're not bad, not by any means. I would always go for the cheaper one, because you're gonna buy a lot of them, and that extra little. Actually, you probably what's the availability? Because I think the autocannon can be kind of nice at times. I don't know. I mean, it's availability versus the autocannon, and that bit of extra range might actually be a bit useful as well. I mean, they're both fine. The AML VPM, it's not worth taking. It has long range. It is very accurate, but you usually don't really want accuracy outside of like these, because they're just there for mostly killing infantry. But it's also 60 points for a single mortar. It's just not worth taking. For half the points you get the HS30, which is like the best 5HE mortar in the game. So it is of course less accurate, but you get 2 for the same price, and you even get a bit more accuracy. The speed and such very, very rarely matter, because you have 7,700 meter range. Only the autonomy can actually be a bit annoying sometimes, but that's a very rare scenario. These are both not worth taking because they have a long aim time and are just very basic, the usual low-end artillery that just isn't useful. It's a cheap spec. It is radar, which is a bit unfortunate, but if you want a cheap base defense, that may be better than a VDAA, because a VDAA seems to be very inconsistent at times. This Roland is usually not very useful because, like all Rolands, it fires 2 missiles and then has to reload for 10 seconds. For the radar rodents, it's not really a big deal because mostly they'll kill planes or shoot at planes, and mostly they will only get 2 missiles off anyways. And they're also just more accurate. So if they are gonna shoot helicopters, they have much higher chance of hitting with both missiles, which is often necessary if you want to kill them. But this Roland is mostly gonna be versus helicopters because obviously, you know, huge range difference versus planes. But if you only have 50% accuracy and only 2 shots at ready, there's a good chance that you're gonna miss the second shot. And if the enemy helicopter has rocket pods or something, there's an even bigger chance that it'll just end up killing your AA unit instead of the other way around. So that's why it isn't really worth taking in most of the time. In like a mech or motor deck where you don't have all the options, you might say it might be worth taking, but in these decks, you also can, you have the space and activation points to put in man pads, which are just usually a better choice because they at least have the stealth to not immediately get spotted when firing. Cesar is a 10-second aim time artillery with a decent fire pattern. I believe it fires 3 shots in a relatively short time, so it might be 6 shots, I don't fully remember. What I know is it has a decent fire pattern, meaning it doesn't fire like 10 shots with 10 seconds in between, which would be horrible. Like the Paladin has a very bad fire pattern. The Cesar has a good one. So yeah, it's decent. Just be aware of counter battery, it has no armor. Grotal, very good, long range, good accuracy. Obviously only 4 shots, so don't forget to resupply it. But it is just very good. The whole Gepard line, all of them are perfectly fine. This one if you want the cheap, this one if you want the very deadly. The Stinger, it's just a nice add-on. Yeah, obviously it can somewhat defend itself if you turn the radar off against seed, but obviously against helicopters, be careful because you don't have a lot of range on them. Don't underestimate the extra accuracy. I feel like, or maybe that's just me, but I feel like on specs specifically that sometimes accuracy gets a bit neglected, I'd say. Because obviously rate of fire is very important. But the thing is, if you look at Rolands, and you're like, that's 15% accuracy, or like on any missile system, 15% accuracy, that's a huge deal. But maybe it's just me, but I feel like 15% accuracy, doesn't sound like a big deal on specs, but it is a huge deal as well, so yeah. And stabilizer as well, don't forget about that, especially if you're like seed baiting, meaning that as soon as the enemy fired a seed missile, you turn off your radar and then the missile hits the ground in front of you. You have to be moving, of course, for that to work, instead of your radar unit. That stabilizer can come in handy if you're also getting like followed by helicopters or something. Roland 2, the radar one, is actually perfectly fine. It's just obviously even more anti-plane focused because it has a shorter helicopter range, as well as shorter plane range, but still decent enough anti-plane range. Only 5 instead of 6 HE, which versus planes, usually not a big deal, unless you use it in conjunction with SAMs, because most of the time you just deal 5 damage anyways. So 5 plus 5 is 10, and 6 plus 6 is 12, but both of them kill planes unless they have 2 armor, or they're B5. So that's, against planes, generally speaking, not a big deal. Not for Eurocorps. If you're looking at red formations, that would actually be a big deal because all of their manpads have 4 HE, especially for Eastern Bloc or Baltic Front, which have the Eurocorps and LSTR respectively. That would genuinely be a big deal, 6 versus 5 HE. But again, for Eurocorps, it's usually not. So I think people sometimes look down on the Roland 2, but honestly, it's a perfectly fine unit. I think maybe if you're like the type of person who tends to lose their radar AA to seed, maybe, and you use the Roland 3 mostly versus planes anyways, then maybe give the Roland 2 a try. Then you lose 15 points less if you lose it to seed. It's still gonna be very good versus planes. Roland 3 on the wheels, for openers and such, just the thing is, on the one hand, it being wheeled means that especially in openers, it is gonna be more useful against enemy helicopters. On the other hand, it loses all its armor, meaning that rocket pods are gonna be even more deadly to it. So, and a Roland having only 2 shots at the ready before having to reload, it's not too unlikely that you'll get shotted by rocket pods after you miss. So, it's a double-edged sword. And then of course it's also easier to kill with artillery. The base Lars is just not worth using. Very low rate of fire, low splash damage. Lars 2 is decent. In Eurocorps, just use the French LRM, but it's Lars 2 isn't horrible. Unless you specifically want to smoke MLRS, just use the LRM instead. And because, in case you don't know, high explosive MLRS, their main purpose is to stun, not to kill. If you kill stuff with it, that's fine, but the main purpose is nearly always to stun. Sometimes you just randomly strike where you think a CV is or something, or where you know a CV is, then maybe you want to kill, but most of the time their main purpose is just going to be stun and panic enemy units and then follow up with an attack. So the HE power itself doesn't really matter, it's more the suppression and it's not shown the suppression radius. Mars is the cluster version, low AP, low-ish rate of fire, only 12 shots. It's not worth using. It's not really horrible, but it's hard to fit in both the LRM and the Mars, and the LRM is just going to be more useful, while the Mars obviously, in theory, can kill tanks more effectively. The LRM will also stun and panic them, and if you hit side or rear armor, maybe deal a damage or two. And stunning and panicking them is obviously not as good as killing them, but it's nearly as good as damaging them. And I'd say that they're actually more... The LRM is probably more consistent at panicking and stunning tanks than the Mars is at damaging them. Again, these M109s not really worth using. The 50 points M109s actually are not horrible, because they still have the 7 HE and the high suppression radius, compared to this, which has only 5 HE and a low suppression radius. The rate of fire isn't great, but they're only 50 points, and so if you get 3 or 4 of them, 3 of them is nearly the same cost as an LRM. They're not really horrible. But again, the LRM is just so much more universally useful, so yeah. If for some reason you want artillery, self-propelled, if you want a howitzer, I should say, the M109 is not really that horrible. But then you could also just take the Cesar. But if you want sustained fire with howitzers over a certain area that isn't like over a decently big area, the M109s, the 50-point ones, aren't too bad. You obviously want the fob, and they're going to be quite decently supply heavy. Not too bad, but don't be surprised if you use 4 or 5 of them, that after like 15 or 20 minutes consistently or like continuously, that after 15 or 20 minutes the fob might be empty. Some people like to use the M110s. I mean, for sniping single units, sure, they're good, I guess, but I find way too niche. Like I have them in some decks where I just have activation points left over, and this is like one of the artillery points I could use or something, then sure, but again, LRM, Cesar, or even the M109 really, in my opinion, are always the superior choice. Yeah. I don't get this whole M110 hype that Firestarter kind of started. I don't believe in them. I think I have them in like a few decks. I think I have one in my US Mechanized deck that I actually really kind of enjoy. But the only other options would be the M109. But I think, yeah, I don't know. I just don't really think they're too great, and I haven't called it out so far, I think, in the games I played. But yeah, 33 minutes, and we're now at tanks, right? No, not even. Obviously, between these two, for 10 points, you get 6 more rounds, and no, just by the age, it's 30. Okay, it's probably the best mod in the game, I'd say. If you want cheap wheeled AA, spec specifically, this is a good option. Villarreal Mistral is one of those units that is actually pretty nice, but it's just also hard to fit in, because while this, for what it does, it's actually very cheap, but it has only 1 shot, and then has to reload for 6 seconds, meaning that on its own, it's not going to be too good versus like openers, helo openers. It's good for like low intensity flanks or like bushes here and there. It's not going to be too good for base defense either, because for its costs, it's not very good to deal with like few cheap helicopters. It dies quickly. It is nice, but it doesn't fill a very specific, very needed role. Meaning that it's gonna be hard to fit in. I think in a 1 versus 1 deck, I wouldn't use it. In a team game, it's probably easier to fit in if that your teammate will cover base defense and such. Then that's a different thing. Let's actually go a bit quicker. This is just bad. Low damage output for everything. MX10 obviously OP as fuck. 16 AP, good range, medium optics, forefront armor, meaning it'll survive like most autocannons at a decent range, fast enough for it to fire back and just kill them. It's just very good. Not as OP as the Recon Tab MX10, I'd say, but still very OP. This and the other MX10, either of them, but whichever you use, or if you use both of them at the same time, they'll deal with any ground vehicle wheeled opener at basically any time, unless you get ambushed or whatever. None of the AMX-30 here are using, no stabilizer, and no particular good stats when it comes to armor or AP. Keep in mind the autocannon and gun cannot be fired at the same time, meaning that if you want the autocannon to fire infantry in front of you, you would have to turn off the main gun. So this is why they're not very good, or one of the reasons. Same goes for the AMX-32. They are kind of fine, but they both have the problem that they have less than 13 armor, meaning that against like an M84A in forest range, they're just going to be straight up one shot. 30 AP will one shot the MX40, 20 AP kinetic that is, will one shot the MX32. The MX32 is also one shot by 24 heat, which is Vampire 90 used by LSTR and VDV 90, and 25 AP heat, which is Legion 90 with the Erics or derivatives. MX40 also not particularly great. Kyler has the same issue with the armor. 10 RPM auto-loaded is very nice. Autocannon can be fired, it is able to fire at the same time, just making sure that you don't misunderstand me. But again, 12 armor means that the 10 RPM auto-loaded, as nice as they are, and in theory they would be in forest, against other tanks, where the 15 AP, which is kind of low for 70 points, isn't as big of a deal, makes it kind of a moot point. Because medium tanks and heavy tanks are kind of the meta. You will not see a lot of light tanks in forest, with a few exceptions like a M1 Abrams or something. Light in quotes, of course. M1 Abrams isn't very light, but you get the point. Cheap tanks. So that very often, if it encounters another tank, it'll just get one shot. So the 10 RPM auto-loaded won't be a big help there. M40Ns are just bad, cheap tanks. Leclerc is the best tank you can get. It's just amazing. 12 RPM, very fast, very accurate. Keep in mind, 7-side armor, you will get one shot by spikes to the side. And Chumat for that matter. So be careful with that. Leopard 1 line, also not particularly great. Kind of same with the MX-30s, but at least they have a stabilizer. Leopard 2 line, they're all just very, very average. Leopard 2 has the issue of having no medium optics, so it's not very self-sufficient. Leopard 2A1 is just like 10 points too expensive. And the unfortunate armor and AP distribution. I think if you had 19 AP and 15 armor, for example, like the M84A, would be a much better, honestly, a much better tank, but it doesn't. It's gonna do its job, but it's just inferior to most other medium tanks that you will encounter. M1 will K1, M84A, like I said. But it still does its job decently enough. 2A4 is just very average. Nothing bad about it, but also nothing good about it. The good thing about it is that there's nothing bad. It's just very average everywhere. There's nothing too outstanding about it, but it doesn't really have a specific weakness either. Just a very solid heavy tank. And a 2A5 as well. It's just the most average super heavy that you can get. There's nothing special about it. M102 has the 24 AP, which is special. Genshin 2 has the 23 armor, which is special. The France has the Leclerc, obviously armor, AP, 12 RPM autoloaded, perfect stabilizer. All the Red 4 super heavies, they all have autoloaders. The BU has an ATGM. The Moderna has an autocannon. The VHOR has 10 RP. You get the point, right? But that doesn't mean it's bad by any means. It is 99. Okay, let's say 80% of the time, whether you have a 2A5 an M1A2, a BU, it probably very rarely matters. I guess BU versus 2A5 can matter more often than not because of autoloader, but let's say M1A2 versus Leopard 2A5 in many situations wouldn't really matter. They both have 22 armor, they both have a lot of AP, they both are very accurate, both have 9 RPM, they both have the same range, so, you know, yeah, it's just a super heavy, but it doesn't have to be more. Why did I switch to Canada? What the fuck? Recon. It's just very good optics. Recon, not worth using in Eurocorps. You'll see in a bit why. ML90, not very good. Only 1 armor, only 7 RPM, heat, no stabilizer. You have the MX10. You don't need the ML90, okay? In case you don't know why the MX10 is so good. It has 9 RPM, which is good rate of fire. 55% accuracy, very good, especially for 30 points. 2100 meter range. For 30 points, again, pretty good. 12 AP, not too great, but since the main role of the MX10 is to kill light armored vehicles and infantry, and sometimes maybe shoot into the side of a tank, 12 AP is most of the time sufficient. 3 armor means it's gonna be sturdy enough against basically any autocannon, and many autocannons will only really deal you in like the 15, 14, 1200 meter range, with a few exceptions, but that's a big deal. And at that range, there's a good chance that you might also just one-shot them. Especially in forest range, you will probably one-shot many IFVs as well, while they will need 2 or 3 shots of their autocannon to kill you. Obviously good optics because it's a recon unit. It's wheeled, meaning it will kill basically every other wheeled unit that isn't an AMX-10. And of course medium stealth, which if you put it in a bush, unless the enemy has recon like 2000 meters ahead of it or something, it's not gonna be spotted if it fires. So that's another additional defensive capability on top of its decent enough armor. You just have to be careful that it doesn't have a stabilizer on its main gun, so if you fast move it near the front line and there's gonna be a vehicle that kind of fired it, and you want to fire back, either give it a direct attack command or attack move it. But it's just very good. Well, no, it is fucking OP, okay? Main purpose of this is to kill infantry, which it is decent at, but unfortunately, being a recon unit, you only get 12 of them, so they're pretty card inefficient. But this is to kill mostly light infantry, but light vehicles, but also infantry. This is kill infantry and maybe sometimes kill a few vehicles, but this is mostly for infantry killing. BGS, if you want very cheap recon, you know, they spot just as well as Fernspeer, but they get detected faster and they have no stealth, or worse stealth, I should say, and they're significantly slower, of course, and they're terrible at fighting. In my opinion, if you have regular recon infantry, like 15-point recon infantry, in my opinion are always superior, because for 5 points more, the weaponry doesn't matter, but you get very good stealth instead of good stealth. And the only units that get better than very good stealth are 2-man sniper squads, meaning that hussars are just as easily spotted as, let's say, SBS. 30-point elite have the same stealth value as 5-man regular. Whereas BGS, like I said, have only good stealth, which is a very noticeable difference. Which is why I prefer regular recon infantry instead of militia, which only BGS and the East German Grenze are. If you only have like the choice between BGS and Shock, you know, a 10-point difference, it's a different scenario. But I think if you have the access to light regular recon infantry, I should say, they are, in my opinion, the superior choice. This is worth paying 5 points more. You know, if you only want an infantry squad for spotting, stealth is still important because you don't want it to die, of course, if it's in position. But the hussars are just as stealthy as Commando Spada or anything that isn't the sniper squad. So, in my opinion, the 5 points are worth paying. But it doesn't mean the BGS are bad. Well, same thing with the Alduet. You will see in a bit, not necessary most of the time. Shock recon infantry, if you want your recon infantry to be stealthy, somewhat fast, but also be able to fight decently, that is your choice. Fernspeer, if you want a 2-man sniper team, I think I don't really need to explain. Gazelle Cannon, very good recon helicopter. Not necessarily for actual spotting. This is, well, it is for spotting, but, excuse me. not directly for spotting stuff in cover, like Eurocorps infantry or something. It is there to spot stuff in the open, to spot in the opener where your opponent is driving its units, to spot stuff that is coming in from reinforcements, because you're flying in the air, you have a long line of sight. Stuff in the open, unless it's like infantry, you can spot pretty far, even with only good optics. And it's very cheap, and it can defend itself. It's not very good at defending itself, but it has something. And it also means that if you manage to sneak this around the base, and the enemy has no base defense, you can easily kill a CV jeep or something. Or even against other helicopters that don't have any armament of their own, you're gonna take your time, but you have something to kill it if necessary. So yeah, it's cheap, it's fast, it's just very good. These I went over. Oh yeah, obviously I would use Hazard's 85 over the base ones, because for the same price you get a much better anti-tank weapon. They are not worth using because they only have medium stealth, which for a unit that is fighting, of course, is nice, but for something that can't even fight, let's ignore the MG, which is just bad. This is not. No, then don't use them. I know that Sarah likes to use the VBL in his Eurocorps mech deck, and I can see why, but generally speaking, unless you know really what you're doing or something, or for very niche scenarios, which in this case it is, for example, don't use them. Villarreal Mistral, it is a nice unit compared to the Villarreal. It does have 2 missiles at the ready, meaning it has to reload after firing twice. It has a stabilizer as well, which is very nice. But it's also just very hard to fit in. Because you have AMX 10s, you have AMX 13s, you have Recon Infantry, you have a Gazelle Cannon, and then you have the Tiger. The thing about the Tiger is, it is a jack of all trades, master of none, of course. It has rocket pods, ATGMs, anti-air missiles, but only a few of each. But the big thing is, for one exception, optics, but the combination of all this stuff with the fact that it has stealth. And that is the OP part, because the thing about helicopter stealth is they are not detected by air detection. You see the air detection on these AA units. A Roland and a Roland 3 will spot the Tiger at the same range, which is like honestly way too close. I think the Tiger can fire at basically max range of its missiles, and the Roland will not spot it, or only spot it after firing. But the thing is, air detection doesn't matter against these optics. A Roland will spot just as well as an M113 or an AMX 13. Against helicopters, your ground optics matter, meaning the optics of your Recon Infantry, the optics of your tanks, stuff like that. Which makes the helicopter so important, because one of the issues with this is, more often than not, especially on flanks or something, where you not necessarily have direct line of sight with the Recon Infantry, or your Recon Infantry isn't very close, more often than not, this will fire at your AA, and either just not be spotted at all, or be spotted way too late for the AA to react and kill the Tiger in return. On top of the fact that, especially on bigger maps, it's easy to maneuver the Tiger around without being spotted, but that's a different thing. But yeah, the stealth is what makes it so ridiculous. And of course, stealth, exception optics, you can get deeper into enemy territory and spot for your peace friends or for your artillery. Also, I'm just realizing that I might be talking a bit too fast, so I hope I did not. Yeah, the stealth is the huge part of the Tiger. Keep also in mind that the good stealth on a Tiger is not the same as the good stealth on BGS. BGS have better stealth. The Tiger stealth, even though it says good, is like between infantry good stealth and medium stealth. But it is still ridiculous, honestly. None of these, the Lux line are fine, Leopard 1 is fine, but again, they're not really worth taking because you have so many better options, and these 3 are just not particularly good. In the vehicle tab, I went over the transports in a way. They can be fine in a mech deck. Outside of that, not worth taking. Sagai, no reason, because you have the AMX 10. This is just way too inconsistent. You might think this might be decent base defense. It's not. It's absolutely dog shit. Runs out of ammo quickly without actually doing damage, both against helicopters and ground units. It is just bad. Jeeps, ATGM Jeeps in general, I think are underestimated. Not the Milan Jeeps. The Conquest M Jeeps maybe, or most notably the Tau and I-Tau Jeeps, Tau 2 and I-Tau Jeeps, in my opinion, are underestimated. But these are not, because for one, Milan is slower than a Tau and a Conquest, and two, it has less range, meaning the enemy has, it's easier for the enemy to just close the gap, shoot you once, and you're dead. Kanonenjagdpanzer it's all right. It is good enough sometimes to deal with infantry as fire support, but it's not very good at close range because it doesn't have only 3 armor, only 10 AP with heat, and it has no turrets. So IFVs have usually an easy time killing this. The Marder VTS1 is in the mech deck fine, 15 AP for 25 points, and this range isn't too bad. It is auto-loaded, but also only has 6 RPM. Same thing with these. I know the Blitz War really likes recoilless rifle jeeps. In my opinion, they're absolute dog shit. Why? Because a single autocannon salvo and they're dead. They only have 30% accuracy. They have short range. They have not. Some autocannons have the same range. The Marder 2 even has more range. Only a few have less range, and even then, they have only 12 AP heat, only 7 RPM, no stabilizer. They're just bad, in my opinion. A waste of points. Wieselmark, this is probably your best base defense option, and this says how bad Eurocorps base defense is. Not really, in most scenarios, not having good base defense isn't a big deal. But obviously, you'd rather have good base defense rather than bad base defense. Good autocannon for very cheap, autocannons are one of the better base defense choices, but it only has 1 armor. And the RH-202 is usually not the best option when it comes to base defense autocannons, but it does its job. Wiesel 1 Tau 2 wouldn't be too bad if it had better autonomy. Like I said, I feel like Tau 2 Jeeps and the Wiesel for that matter are a bit underrated because it does have really good off-road speed, but again, the autonomy. 52 minutes in, and we have 2 tabs left to go. Okay, helicopters. This is good. Panther, good rocket pod transport helo. AA helo, but inferior to the Celtic in my opinion. Most importantly, honestly, because of the speed and the range, which are also just the 2 biggest differences. So obviously, because of these 2 reasons, yeah. Most of the time use the Celtic, but you will. Unless you specifically only want the anti-air helo and you don't have a Tiger on the field yet, you will not need it as often because not rarely should or will you have a Tiger at ready as well. Be careful when you use that, by the way. Even though it has stealth, it is still kind of easy to lose if you're too aggressive with it. But it's not rare that you might just have a Tiger at ready. So if you want an AA helo, there's a good chance that this is just sitting somewhere on the map when you need it, when you don't need it at the moment, and you can just reroute it. Honestly, these pure end ATGM helicopters, same with the Gazelles, they're a bit underrated because they're so cheap. Most notably, honestly, the 40-point Gazelle Hot. Obviously, it has less AP, less accuracy, but the Gazelles are also just faster. Obviously, only get 4 instead of 6, but it's not rare that they will die at the end. But there's a good chance that in an engagement, at the start of an engagement, the enemy AA might not be fully, moved up, or might be at a position where once they spot your Gazelle, they might not be able to immediately kill it, So that means that you can move in, shoot your 2-3 anti-ATGMs, and even if you just kill like 2-3 IFVs with that might already be the 40 points that you spent on it. So these are really, really underrated, in my opinion. But at the same time, might also just have a Tiger ready. And such an ATGM helicopter most of the time will not substitute for ground units. So it's more of an additional unit, if you don't have any ground units on the field, you'd rather buy ground units instead of this, of course. But if you have it on the field, or you have the points, or there's a certain opportunity, these can really do a lot of work and be very annoying to your opponents. But yeah, I'd always go for the Gazelle Hot or the Gazelle Hot 2, mostly because of their speed, which is usually better than the 2 extra missiles. Cassiope also very good because it has a very good autocannon. Yeah, I think it's very obvious for light vehicles, or if you need fire support fast on a flank, especially where you know there is no AA, they can do a lot of work. These Tigers, they're also very good, but since you have the Recon Tiger, I feel like there's not really a reason to use them because they kind of fill the same role, especially the AA Tiger. The anti-tank Tiger might have a better reason to use because it has 8 HOTS. So unless you specifically want either more Tigers or specifically a heavy anti-tank helicopter, I would not use them. Instead, put in the HOT or the Gazelle Celtic or the Cassiope, which doesn't mean that they are bad, but they just heavily overlap with the Recon Tiger. In a team game, it may be perfectly fine, or in a motorized deck or something where you have more slots in your helicopter or more points that you can spend on your helicopter tab, maybe. But most of the time, they're just not necessary. They're just not gonna add a lot to the deck, I should say. But again, they're also very good, and the stealth is just as broken on them. Air Alpha Jet, just a horrible napalm plane. I don't think I need to explain that. Attendard, horrible bomber. Super Attendard isn't bad. It does have only semi-active missiles, but it has a decent turn radius, is fast enough, and has decent ECM. 2 times 30 AP obviously is very good. But the thing is, usually Peace Run is just better because it's, I wouldn't say guaranteed, but more consistent damage, being Fire and Forget. And with the smoke meta, Fire and Forget is even more desirable than before. Which doesn't mean the Super Attendard is bad. It's just that many people just prefer the Peace Run because it's more consistent. It's also faster. It has short-range missiles. And especially with the Tiger, where sometimes you just pop in, you have your Peace Run on the way, and once the Peace Run is close, not directly in range, but like at 6,000 meter range or something towards the target, you pop up with your Tiger, spot it again, assuming you spotted it before, but get your Tiger in safety, and then get it out in a bit dangerous, spot directly the target, move in with the Peace Run, and once the Peace Run fired, you move your Tiger out of there again, for example. With some active missiles, you will have to keep line of sight the whole time, of course, and shenanigans like that. But still, the Super Attendard, in my opinion, is not bad at all. I think people are still kind of underestimated, but they may not necessarily underestimate them, it's just that Peace Run is just usually just, in many scenarios, just better. If you want a dedicated anti-air helo, this is your choice, but Eurocorps is one of those decks that doesn't really need it. You have the Tiger, you have Crotals. You don't need much more. In my opinion, the best ASF card in the game. It has the perfect balance between availability, consistency or damage output, and not achievability, affordability. It is the only one of, I think, 3 planes with long or medium range Fire and Forget missiles that comes with veteran or elite. The other one on veteran being the Yak 141, and the one on elite being the MiG-29. The big advantage is that the KWS has 3 medium range missiles instead of 2 compared to the Yak 141 and the MiG-29. And 3 is the exact amount of missiles that versus basically every other plane, unless it's very, very slow, you will be able to get 3 missiles off in a head-to-head engagements. Meaning if the KWS had 4 missiles and flew into a Yak 141, it wouldn't be able to get a 4th missile off because by then it would be past the plane or within minimum range. So 3 is the perfect sweet spot, between that affects the price to potentially have you at lower veterancy, if you get the point. It still has short range missiles, although they are only 50% accuracy, 4 HE, and have less range. But the thing with the Yak is that 2 missiles is usually not really enough medium range missiles, meaning you will most of the time get into the short range missile range, which you would ideally want to prevent. But the KWS has the 3rd missile that can more often than not prevent that and kill the plane before it gets into short range missiles. But it still has these short range missiles just in case, if it comes to that, compared to the MiG-29. And compared to, let's say, a Block 52 or something, it comes on veteran, meaning it gets like 5-6% more accuracy, and it's also 20 points cheaper for the same ECM same medium range missiles, a bit worse turn radius, a bit slower. Still the best gun on a plane that you can get, which if you get into range of short range missiles does matter. And the accuracy and range on these AB9s is usually not a big deal. So yeah, it just has the perfect sweet spot. Because the thing with the Yak 141, and it's a similar issue with the East German Yak 29. If you compare it to like the Polish MiG-29, which is outside of the Finnish MiG-29 probably the best medium range ASF on Red 4, they're only semi-active, but the Yak 141 will get 2 missiles off, but the MiG-29 will also get 2 missiles off in a head-to-hand engagement. You know, being semi-active means that it wouldn't be able to get a third one off, since it can't fire the second one until the first one either hits or is a guaranteed miss. So for semi-active, that would be the sweet spot for medium-range ASFs. So that's why Fire and Forget, when you only have 2 medium-range missiles, is not a huge advantage, which is why when it comes to the East German one, it's not worth paying 15 points, because all you do is pay 15 points to get a bit less range, 1 less HE, which isn't a big deal, but Fire and Forget instead of semi-active. And not only do you pay 15 points more, you also lose a step in veterancy, meaning you lose accuracy. That's why it's not worth it. If the East German MiG-29 had 3 of those R-77s, that would be a different deal. But since it has only 2, that is just a downgrade, effectively. Back to Eurocorps, though. Peace Run, we went over. Crusader, you know, the thing is, it doesn't have a Vulcan, and it has it has the same turn radius, but it has less ECM, but whatever. You don't need a pure anti-helo plane. Jaguar, if you want cheap seat, it doesn't have stealth, however, which on seat is pretty important, but if you want it cheap, if you want a seat, especially in 1 versus 1, the ECR is just too expensive. So there's a Jaguar if you want it. It's fine. It has good missiles for the price. Good enough range, good enough accuracy and IP. So at least there's that, even though you have no stealth. Mirages, they're all fine. This one is also very fine, but unless you want another card of ASFs on top of your KWS and you want it to be cheap, then, you know, there's no reason to use them. The RDI would probably be, you know, the next best medium range ASF that you can have. Mirage 3 is a decent napalm bomber. It has no ECM, so be aware of that. But the payload is decent. Mirage HE bomber is just bad, you know, low payload. Few high HE bombs are always better than many low HE bombs, because they're scaling exponentially with HE, which is why 120 HE bomb, for example, is so much better than 215 HE bombs. It's not a worse cluster bomber; it's a decent cluster bomber, but with the Peace Rhine, with the Tiger, you have decent anti-tank capability where you don't need a cluster bomber. But if you specifically want something to be, like if you have trouble dealing with enemies that may be using super heavies plus smoke, and you have trouble keeping line of sight, the cluster bomber might be your choice, you know? Like I said, it's not horrible and it's very survivable. If you ignore points, like costs, this is the best ASF in the game. It has medium stealth. It has 65% base accuracy on its missiles. Yeah. In team games, I usually run a card of Rafale and a card of KWS. So yeah, if you want a high-end ASF, Rafale is a good choice. Definitely up with it. Definitely take it on Elite. It's definitely worth paying for. ACR is just a very solid but also expensive seatplane. Yeah, there's not much more to be said about it. It's a bit like the Leopard 2A5, you could say, you know. Very average air rates, fast, it has missiles, there's nothing special about it, but it's just, you know, it has 50% ECM, it has 1000 kmh fast, it has 50 to 50 meter range on seat missiles, you know. What more do you want? IDS, it's usable. It's very mediocre, but it's usable. If for some reason you definitely want an HE bomber, it's fine. For 15 HE bombs for 115 points isn't really great, but it's better than 140 points that it used to cost in the past. It has decent enough survivability. It has aim 9s if you for some reason need to shoot at planes or helicopters with this plane. Yeah, again, usually not really necessary, but if for some reason you definitely want an HE bomber, the IDS isn't really a horrible plane. So yeah, that's Eurocorps. I'm just gonna quickly show my Eurocorps deck that I'm currently running for 1v1. I'm currently trying out the MX-10Ps still. I might go try out maybe something like 2 cards or like a card of Pentagrams instead of the MX-10P. Pentagrams at the 5-pointer, that is. I don't know yet. For a team game, if you want the deck to be, just pause the video, of course. If you want to take a closer look at the deck. For team games, I'm running this. Very basic as well. In team games, you can usually get away with taking more expensive units, which is why I take Chasseur 85 instead of basic Chasseurs. These 5 points, while they of course matter on a single card, that's 100 points on a single card that you pay extra compared to the base ones. In team games, it doesn't matter as much as it does in 1v1s, which is why in team games, a lot of issues that some decks face are not as present as before. And I've recently also have been running Eurocorps. Oh yeah, 2-man. I have a deck just with Fanchbear. For reasons, as you saw, maybe also 2 cards of artillery. Just sneak Fanchbear around and gets line of sight in their base. I also have a mech deck that is based on Sarto's Eurocorps mech deck. SARS mech deck. I think I did some adjustments. Maybe I didn't do any adjustments. I don't fully remember. Like I said, he runs the VBL purely, really just to sneak around the flank and put it in a bush near, I don't know, the spawn point or something. Which is on a map like Highway is easy to do, because there's so much open field that's easy to overlook this or not spot it. But it's just, that is really the only reason. There's no point in using it as like a frontline scout because it gets spotted easily and it doesn't really do much. And yeah, the AMX-10s, they're fine. They're decent enough in the mech deck. Because of the veterancy, the ATGMs actually hit as well. And I'm actually surprised that there are no Rolands. Personally, I'd probably put in a Roland 2 or Roland 3. But again, this is SAR's deck, Sarto. Yeah. Let me know. I hope I talked a bit slower here. I hope I explained some stuff more that maybe you think I lacked in explaining. That wasn't English. Whatever, you get the point. Yeah, USSR should be next, and then I'll also do blue 4 and red 4 unspec, which will be a bit different because I won't just go over the armor and go over every single unit. I will then just, then here show off the specific noteworthy unit that you have access to and should probably use or should give it a look when making a red or blue unspec deck, with or without specialization. And that's that. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something, and I'll hopefully see you next time.